So we're really looking forward to our discussion today. Our guest will discuss the lesser known costs of transfer and how some of these costs might be unavoidable for particular types of transfer. We'll hear about what these costs entail and brainstorm ways we can communicate them to prospective students. So without further ado, I'm happy to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Janice Aurini. Janice is an associate professor at the Department of Sociology and Legal Studies at the University of Waterloo. Her research focuses on education, and she has conducted several larger scale qualitative research projects on topics spanning from private education, summer setback, health impacts on remote teaching, and how national schooling contexts shape parenting practices. So I will hand it over to you, Janice. Thanks for joining us. I don't know if you're speaking, Janice, but it appears you're muted. There we go.
So yeah, sorry about that. I just had to find my my menu to unmute. Well, thank you to everyone on the call and that lovely introduction. I appreciate you taking the time during your lunch hour to join us today. So, again, no surprise by the title that we're going to be talking about some of the hidden or really the costs associated with transfer that are less acknowledged in the literature. Okay. So we're probably all familiar on the call about the various costs related to transfer that are discussed, and there's a fairly robust literature about the financial and credit and the graduation costs that are associated sometimes with transferring institutions, at least amongst quantitative research. Qualitative researchers, on the other hand, have tended to focus on more the social or psychological costs associated with transfer. Transfer students sometimes feel a sense of failure or fear of disappointing family or friends, particularly if they did not finish their previous program. And in some cases, researchers have reported that students feel that they have a little bit more difficulty in terms of developing relationships and fitting in with their new institutions or programs. And we want to contribute to this literature, but focusing more on sort of the tails of the data, that is factors in transfer that don't get as much attention and yet nonetheless have implications for transfer students. And what we find is that in some cases, the types of challenges students identify with and that have been reported in the literature may in fact just be a function of when researchers actually catch students in the transfer process. We find that in some cases, the types of challenges that students have identified in the literature, actually are resolved relatively quickly. And that as students sort of become more settled in their new institution, it sort of resolves, these challenges get resolved, or at least students find a way to mitigate them or they accept them. We also point out that some of the challenges like time to completion in some cases anyways, are going to just be a natural byproduct of the transfer process. And it's not necessarily an indicator that students are at risk in any way. We do have a couple of guiding questions for the audience, and I assure you there'll be no test at the end of this presentation, but just to sort of think about as I'm presenting our findings. And so, how can feedback from Ontario transfer students inform the kinds of decision-making that we have and improve the experience for future students? One of the things that we're going to talk about today is how students feel a bit caught in the middle, academically, socially, administratively. So how can we sort of enhance this process, make things more transparent to students, and provide students with the kinds of support they need to catch up? And then finally, it'd be great to sort of benefit from the collective wisdom on this call. So we have Emerson, myself, our other co-author, we suggest some things and recommendations that emerge from our data collection, but I am confident that amongst all of you in the audience that you'll have some very helpful suggestions in terms of how we might mitigate these challenges and the kinds of things that your institutions do that have been proven to be successful. Okay. The research that I'm going to be presenting on is based on focus groups with 51 students. and longitudinal interviews. So we conducted at least two interviews with 56 students from, that should be 2 colleges and 3 universities. ONCAD had initially set up meet and greets with institutions, and ultimately students from Humber, Fleming, Nipissing, Trent, and Waterloo participated in this study. I also want to just give a bit of a shout out to our partner institutions. The registrar's office and various advisors and staff at these institutions were really instrumental to facilitating the data collection. These institutions identified transfer students within their setting, and they emailed transfer students at least 2 to 3 times at each phase of the data collection. And so they're really incredibly helpful. They also helped us frame our definition of, who is a transfer student. And so based on their advice, we define them as domestic undergrad or diploma-seeking students who had previous Canadian post-secondary experience and engaged in one of the 5 pathways. For the focus groups, we ran them throughout the 2021-2022 school year. And so we were, in some cases, students were giving us retrospective accounts in terms of sort of how their transfer experience unfolded. But in the case of the interviews, we really want to capture students at the very beginning of their transfer journey. So we interviewed those students in the fall when they were entering their new program, and then again in the winter after they sort of settled in. We actually did try to interview these students a 3rd time in the spring to really sort of capture the life cycle of their first year at their new institution. But we found that very few students took us up on this offer, in part because by the second interview, a lot of students no longer identified as a transfer student, which is a good thing. They had settled into their new program, they were happy, they were doing really well. Which I think bodes in a positive way. However, as we report in our presentation, this doesn't mean there weren't some lingering issues or ongoing consequences of transferring institutions. For in terms of the types of questions that we ask people, our focus groups and fall interview questions focus on 4 areas of inquiry. We ask students a lot of background questions initially about not just their transfer experience, but also their initial post-secondary choice from high school into their first post-secondary institution, and the kinds of decisions that went into that initial choice, and then ultimately their decision to transfer institutions. We then ask them a variety of questions about the process of transferring at both their sending and receiving institutions. So what worked well, what didn't work so well. And then, of course, we want to find out more about their post-transfer integration. How was this transition unfolding? Were they settling in? Again, what was working well or not? Throughout our discussions, we continually probe students for the kinds of recommendations that would have improved their journey. And then for the longitudinal interviews, when we interviewed them a second time, we first reminded them of some of the things that they had told us at the very first interview. And we wanted to find out, were the issues that they identified at interview 1, were they sort of ongoing? Had they resolved themselves? What sort of made the difference in terms of that resolution? Were there any new issues? And then finally, importantly, with the benefit of hindsight, what, if anything, could have facilitated their transition? Okay. In general, overall, these were a happy group of students. The students in our sample described their decision to transfer their new programs and institutions very positively. They told us a lot of positive things about the kinds of supports they received along the way, stories about advisors, faculty, and staff who had supported their transition. And overall, again, they were generally positive about the overall experience of transferring. And among our longitudinal interviewees, as I mentioned, a lot of the challenges that they identified at interview 1 had largely been resolved, or like I said, they had found a way to manage or accept them. and a lot of times when we ask them sort of, in addition to sort of the support they received and how their overall journey was relatively smooth, I mean, in a lot of cases, it was just finding a home, a program, an institution that was a better fit academically or socially, or just with their personalities, was cited as some of the key reasons why they were satisfied with their overall transfer journey. However, regardless of their overall satisfaction, they still pointed to various costs associated with transferring, including some of the downside of transfer credits, which I'll explain in a moment. The challenges with sort of playing catch up with program requirements and prerequisites. And then while less prevalent among our interviewees, some of the lingering consequences of transferring. So how past missteps at previous institutions continue to follow or dog them along their post-secondary journey. And then again, while relatively minor and not as prevalent among our interviewees, there were cases where students felt that they had fallen a bit through the cracks, whether it be socially or academically or administratively, which required, again, some catch up on their part. Okay. So what do I mean by the downside of transfer credits? Because couldn't they be anything but a good thing? For the most part, yes. And I should say that when I talk about some of the downside of transfer credits, I don't want to downplay their overall benefits, but just to point out that there are sometimes unwelcome strings attached with them. So we're all very familiar with this idea that, we really wouldn't try to close those leaky transfer pathways, particularly when it comes to credit loss for students. It's a key area of concern amongst policymakers and institutions, and for very good reasons. However, what we found is that even when these leaks are closed and students do get transfer credits, it doesn't always reduce inefficiencies or reduce students' post-secondary journeys. In some cases, we found there's no time served for past post-secondary work. Even if students get all the transfer credits or the maximum number allowed at their new institution. This challenge is understandably more acute among students who transfer programs that are substantively or substantially different from their previous program. And in some cases, students' post-secondary journeys are lengthened when programs are more sort of term locked in terms of when prereqs or courses are offered, or when they're more rigidly scaffolded, and students have to follow very specific progression throughout their program. So here's a few examples. This is Gabriel. Gabriel is a college university transfer student who entered his program what he thought was halfway through or midway, after receiving a number of transfer credits for his past work. However, this didn't necessarily shorten his overall journey, and he wasn't able to, in his words, fast track, and he had to still complete all 5 years of his current program. So as Gabriel noted, when I transferred, they kind of made it seem like, okay, you get all these credits. I get here midway through the program and they're like, oh yeah, actually your transfer credits don't mean anything in the sense that you fast track. You just take less courses in your upper years. That means a 5-year program on top of the 2 years I did before. So that's 7 years. I was really mad. That's a lot of money. I'm not happy with it. Among our interviewees, they also cited how transfer credits made them ineligible for certain opportunities, such as co-op, because they were beyond the cutoff point. And so this was the case in Jordan. For Jordan's case, a university transfer student, again, entering programs after the cutoff point meant that they were not eligible for things that initially had actually attracted to them to their new institution. And so in some cases, there was always a sense of playing catch up, when students do enter programs halfway through. So they're feeling like they're not quite a first-year student. They're not really a direct entry student, but they're also not quite a second-year student. And so students were always feeling like they're playing catch up. At least, I should say some of the students felt they're playing catch up. Transfer credits also did not alleviate other program requirements that often had to be then completed in a much more compressed time frame. So in Eva's case, Eva's a swirler. She was on her third post-secondary program. And in her case, she had to complete a lot of concert-based hours with her program. And because she was entering partway through the program, it meant that she lost a full year that other students in her class had been able to take in order to complete these. I think there was like 100 or 200 hours of concert-based requirements. And so this was a challenge for her. And of course, in this case, when we were actually catching people through this project, this was made worse because it was during the pandemic, which then further limited someone like Eva's ability to get those kinds of hours completed. Sometimes, in some cases, what had also happened is that transfer credits made it difficult for students to complete certain other types of program requirements, particularly if they were out of sequence with their program. So entering programs partway through meant that course selection was more complicated, and kind of catching up on those prereqs and required courses or practicums that were required. And so students describe the challenge of not following that traditional schedule compared to their direct entry peers. And they would say stuff to us like, my schedule's a mess, and that their programs were very term locked. And so they always felt that they were one step behind their peers. So in Camille's case, university transfer student who actually did receive the maximum number of credits. But because her program was substantively different, she felt always behind the 8 ball. So as she noted, I transferred into second year, and you can't take other courses until you've taken that. So I had to take Psych 101. But the thing is that a lot of my other courses, they're pre-planned. So I was behind the entire time. But the one course I need to go on, and this was this practicum that she was looking forward to, is not available until next winter. So students like Camilla talked about having to take an extra 6 months and even up to a year to catch up on all of their requirements, even though they got all the transfer credits that they hoped for. Okay, and again, I just want to be clear that we don't want to detract from the overall benefits of transfer credits, just that most students are very grateful, they recognize their value, but just to recognize that in some cases they come with unwelcome strings attached. Okay. And then finally, to talk about some of the long shadow of transfer. Again, not as widespread. A lot of our students discussed the transfer process is very smooth, straightforward. And again, they cited things like very helpful advisors and staff and faculty being happier with their current program, helpful websites and other kinds of tools that our institutions have developed. But in some cases, there were some unwelcome surprises. You're probably all aware, people on the call, that sometimes when students leave a program, not all students exit cleanly. That is, in some cases, students would have left their previous program perhaps after the midterm or halfway through at some point, and they were not aware that their transcript would follow them into their new institution. And in some cases, what that meant is that their transcript was messier. And it appeared, at least on paper, that they had failed out of their previous program. And in some cases, they were put on academic probation at their new institution. And it prevented them and limited their ability to engage in other kinds of opportunities. And this was often a source of embarrassment and confusion for these students who, at least again, according to them, while they were unhappy, they weren't failing out of their previous program. They just didn't really like it, or it wasn't a good fit for them. And perhaps more aligned with the previous scholarship is that students sometimes felt that, out of step or kind of betwixt and between, again, not really first year, not really second year, and that they felt that their age and maturity and post-secondary experience made them a little bit different from their peers. And they weren't able to sort of relate to what they felt were their younger and less experienced classmates. Administratively, some students felt that their in-between status, made it more challenging in terms of, at least again, according to them, they felt that they had fallen, in some cases, through the cracks a little bit. They might have been labeled as a mature student, which they felt didn't really sort of fit their identity as a student and where they were in their post-secondary journey. And while they had some knowledge and experience with post-secondary, in some cases, the knowledge that they had gained didn't really sort of fit their current institutional context. So they might have been very well acquainted with the processes and the rules and so forth, and where things were located and who to ask for at their previous institution. They still needed some of that sort of first year types of information or could have benefited more. Okay. So in conclusion, one of the things I think that Emerson, Vanessa, and I and the research team really learned throughout this journey, talking to a lot of transfer students, is just the importance of contextualizing students' pathways to and through post-secondary. How things like longer completion times can sometimes just reflect the unavoidable consequences of transfer rather than being some kind of indication of risk or that there's a problem. Particularly those students who take, unconventional routes, they change majors, major areas of study and so forth, have to catch up on things like work hours or other kinds of requirements that's associated with their current program. And so it really sort of, for our lesson, our walk away was really to broaden our analysis of the kinds of costs and consider maybe some creative ways of how we could mitigate them. One thing I think that became quite apparent in talking to students is the importance, even though they sort of have been around the block with the post-secondary, is that they still need a fair amount of handholding and advising because sometimes they don't know what they don't know. And so mapping out program requirements and if possible, building some creative workarounds when possible is really important. So in cases where, perhaps their sequence needs to be changed, perhaps helping students strategize ways to catch up, whether it be, suggesting that they take a course in the summer and so forth to get caught up on those prerequisites. Students really sort of need that sort of additional and creative kinds of advising. Secondly, the importance of communicating costs to students. So in some cases, costs can't be, they're unavoidable, right? They're going to take more time. But just so they know that they might be, for example, ineligible for things like co-op, they might be ineligible for certain kinds of scholarships and so forth. And then finally, and this is probably something that should be communicated even at the high school level, is to communicate the importance of cleanly exiting previous classes and programs so there's not those unwelcome surprises. And I think that's it. Thank you.